Monday, was looking at public comment requests that we'd had. The board had received 9 specific requests as it related to map changes. Hey, I'd like to change this particular piece of property from A to B. And the conversation with the board was ultimately ended up at, this is public comment. We appreciate public comment. Like all public comment, they have to decide, what do we do with it? Do we accept? Do we say something different? What they concluded was that the nature of the public comment and the fact that it was unique and specific to an individual property, they were uncomfortable tackling that just as part of the overall process, and that it would be addressed more appropriately through an individual amendment that would follow the standard process. So they made it very clear that they were not judging for or against any application. It was purely a process conversation. And so we'll see if individuals who submitted those choose to follow up with an individual application. If so, it'll come in, it'll go through the Community Development Board, it'll get the public notices and go to the City Commission, as we usually get about a dozen a year, go through that process as well. So the other pieces that we heard, there's 2 things that we've been working on. One is, as you're well aware, the city has the Laserfiche system that allows comments to be archived. You can go find a certain subject and see the exact wording of every single written comment that has been submitted. When there's 3 or 4 relating to an individual project, it's a pretty easy thing for people to go browse through those and feel like they're up to speed. In this case, we're in excess of 300. That's not something you just sit down for a few minutes and browse through. And so the staff built a spreadsheet that includes, all right, here's the date it was submitted, here's the person who submitted it, here's the link to the full comment. And then we built a series of subjects that seem to be coming up pretty frequently. And then there's some math at the bottom, thank you Excel, so that you could look at it and say, all right, out of all of these different subjects, what's showing up the most frequently? If I'm interested in a given area of comment, I don't have to go through and read every single one of them every single time. If I want to see the comments about affordable housing, I can go and I can see, all right, it's this one and this one and this one. So that was included with the packet. An updated version of that will be distributed for the October 16th meeting, which is upcoming this Monday again. So that is going forward. And then the other piece that we put in was a document where we took, I remember it was top 9 or top 10, but said, all right, these are the things we're hearing the most. And then this is how they kind of fit into the document. Either this is something that already exists, and so the comment may or may not have been aware of that, or yeah, this is a change, this is how we're addressing it, or like with affordable housing, that's something where last year the city did several code amendments that significantly revised our affordable housing as a result of changes in 21 by the state legislature. And so those are simply carrying forward. So the subject is addressed in the code, but it's not necessarily a quote unquote change. So just trying to clarify and help people get pointers to where they find that information. Not trying to say somebody's right or wrong, but just here's additional information around this particular subject that seems to be an area of significant question. And then the last item was based on either public comment or just continued review from the staff. We identified some additional revisions that we wanted to put out there for the public to be aware of. And I will show those in a minute. So this chart lists was included except for number 9. That came in after we had proposed the packet or processed the packet, so number 9 came in later. But this is just a summary of the comments that had come in specifically relating to the maps. And then one of the things we did want to talk about is some of the things that, yes, we heard the comments, but there's only so much we can do about it. A lot of comments on, you know, we need to control the price of housing. We should prevent people from out-of-state purchasers who don't live here, those kinds of comments. Totally sympathetic with that. It's also either something that's outside the scope of this particular project, or else it's something that the state just simply says, you Bozeman cannot deal with this. Keep your hands out of it. And so we wanted folks to know that, yes, we are paying attention to that, but there's limits on what any individual project can do. And related to that, there's 3 code amendment cycles that are currently underway that are also addressing comments that came up with some frequency in the public comment. Short-term rentals showed up pretty frequently. That's moving forward, as it says on the screen, to the City Commission with some proposed revisions on October the 17th. So if folks are interested in that, that packet should be publishing probably later today or early tomorrow. So folks can take a look at what the proposal looks like, and they can offer comment through that process. And then wetlands is another one, sensitive lands issues. 2 things are happening with that. One is there is a formal amendment moving forward, which will go to the City Commission here, as it says, on the 5th. Part of that is in response to some federal law changes that happened, and the city's now having to respond to that. The other piece, which is just, I think, scheduled for initial draft release on the 19th, is the sensitive lands plan that Strategic Services has been leading for the city. That's a collaborative, multi-jurisdictional project between Bozeman, Belgrade, Gallatin County, and lots of other agencies and partners throughout the valley. And so that's not something that we're in a position to do anything with it, because it doesn't exist yet. But it's certainly related to some of those public comments, and the city's definitely interested in the subject. It's just kind of an all things in due time situation. And then the last code amendment element, Jessica in Water Conservation and her team have been working on developing water conservation measures for years, and are now working on bringing forward some code revisions in the spring. And so that will also follow up. Because these things are happening independently, we tried to stay away from those subjects with this particular project, to not be crossing the proverbial lines and getting people confused over, well, we're editing it, but wait, didn't we just edit it last month, type situations. So if you have interest in these other areas, whatever the outcome of those directions get merged and brought forward into either the code as it stands or the UDC itself as it gets replaced, depending on just the timing for how that all happens. So the primary concepts and ideas that we had heard from the public, this is just a simple list. The RA district, far and away, is the most frequent comment, and then it starts splitting out. A lot of folks commented on more than one thing, which is absolutely fine, of course, and we tried to encapsulate that in that summary spreadsheet. So a lot of range of subject matter that folks are concerned about, and certainly understand that. So there were several changes that were proposed with the text, and you can see these if you want to dig into the packet from last Tuesday. These actually are in numerical order, and I can count, so I didn't miss the one. We're going to get to that in a moment. Number 2 is a direct response to some public comment about additions and modifications to existing buildings and how you harmonize meeting current standards with the physical environment that already exists with those homes, and how you can synchronize those up. 3 is a procedural element, just making clear requirements that folks need to submit if they're going to ask for an amendment. Number 4 is staff suggested addition to our agricultural provisions that are in the code. This is something that has been used successfully in the community for a number of years, but unique to one particular site. Having shown that it can work, we'd like to expand it and make it available for other places that also can make it work. 5 is a procedural, and 6 is a procedural element as well. Just kind of filling up some of the process holes. What happens if a project just goes dark? We've had situations like that. Either the economy eats a project, or there's a partnership that has a falling out or something, and all of a sudden you just can't get an answer on somebody who's working a project. So this gives us an opportunity to say, you know, we've reached out to you, we've tried to move this project with you, you're totally being stonewalling us, and we can't account to the public for what's in the pipeline. And so we can basically close the project out. That's what number 5 does. And the biggie was a proposal for revisions to the RA zoning district. So this would divide it a couple of different ways, splitting out R3 to be its own district, renumbering things, modifying the allowed uses, and then there's a whole lot of other pieces and parts that would need to be revised accordingly to reflect all those changes. The board did not get to the discussion stage on this. They listened to a lot of public comment, and so they're hoping to complete public input on the 16th and be able to move into conversation so they can start debating, all right, now that we've heard all this stuff, what are we going to do with it? So what comes next is the October 16th meeting. So what happens procedurally once the public comment, the comment section of the public hearing closes, then the board has to take all that information. They have internal discussion. They can ask questions of the staff, and they can say, well, we see XYZ thing in the code. We like that. That's working. We have concerns with this one. We're not sure we want to go there. And ultimately, they work their way through to landing on a recommendation. On a small project, sometimes that goes pretty fast. On a big project, sometimes that takes a long time. And so we're scheduled for the 16th, but I don't think anybody's expecting that everything will finish on the 16th, but that's the date that we know for now. That's kind of my overview on what we talked about most recently.
So I don't know how we want to tackle this. I think it might be worth it to just go through our list of questions that we received from Brad and Linda. I don't have an email from you, Amy, but yeah, let me just double check.
I've been at my desk for about 10 minutes today, so yeah, I was out of the office at that time, so I have not seen your questions. We'll wing it. Okay, I found it. Okay. It was also buried under 24 more emails in my inbox.
Okay, so let's start with the RA question submitted from Linda. Linda, do you have those, or should I read what you have? Okay, yeah. So these are just verbatim what was submitted to us. So the first one from Linda here, Mr. Saunders stated that the many requirements for placing an 8-unit, 3-story, 10,000 square foot building in the RA zone would be difficult, if not impossible. There are things like the 40% lot coverage standards, setback requirements, green space requirements, and parking. So why then include this kind of development in the RA zoning? Chris stated last meeting that it would be the same as or better than placing 3-unit developments in the same area, and the rest of his answer was unclear. So another explanation of sort of those constraining factors and why we would be so permissive in the RA zoning if it's unlikely to actually take place.
Okay. I think the short answer is because there's so much variation. If you look on the map here, the yellow shade is RA. And as you can see, some of that is definitely in historic core of the community, but a lot of it is also out in greenfield development areas where people would have the ability to design a subdivision or otherwise prepare a site that would fit very nicely with the standards. At the same time, the criteria that we have put in place, as you alluded to, prevent somebody from taking an 8-plex and squeezing it into a place where it really shouldn't be there. If, on the other hand, they can show that they meet a whole laundry list of things that need to be there, then arguably it will fit. When we look at the older part of town, there is a broad diversity of different kinds of homes, different sizes, configurations, 3-story homes, 1-story homes, 2-story homes, townhomes, duplexes, courtyards, all kinds of different things. And folks feel pretty strongly that they like that area of town. And so the RA district actually is a better description of the uses in that area than the current zoning is. So we're trying to look at how do we say that the code can allow to be created the thing that people say they love, and at the same time prevent somebody from blowing it up. The fun balancing act. Mm-hmm. 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 I think somebody's knocking to get in. At least that's what it sounds like. I'm not sure the doors are locked yet, but I think there's kind of two parts to that question. The second part of that was you were asking about somebody who's applying to upzone. That's a zone map amendment process that can certainly create a difference. If someone is pursuing redevelopment through a zone map amendment, if they're putting in that 5 to 6 months worth of process, they probably are looking for something that is not just a small increment above what is already allowed. They're probably looking for something that's larger. Whereas we think the RA parameters allow folks to redivide inside an existing framework of a home. So if I've got a larger property and now I'm single and I want to do something with my property, I can do that. When we looked at the results from the 2020 census, some of this area immediately north of Main Street here was showing that 45% of all the residences had an individual in them. Other parts of town were as low as 25%, but still that's a very large percentage of our housing stock that only has one person in it. If folks can redevelop those homes, then we're providing housing with the same infrastructure. We're allowing people to be in neighborhoods. But it is an interesting question. Based on the public comment, it's one of the reasons that staff suggested making the changes that you just saw on the screen a few minutes ago. And ultimately, that's a policy question. And the City Commission is the one who finally says, we want to go this way, or we want to go that way, or we don't want to go that. In any way, we're happy with what we have. But at some point, you have to have the public conversation.
I just noticed that a lot of the public comments saw putting that 8-plex in as opening the door for future upzoning fairly quickly, and that is a concern. Well,
just touch back again that an upzone and working within the bounds of whatever zone you have, those are two very different processes.
Well, changing the zone?
changing the zoning, so once an eightplex is in there, if the developer has intentions of being in a bigger complex in the area next to, close to, around, then the process would be to buy up the properties in that eightplex and request to move to RB. And the city commission.
Please use your microphone for the other
Oh,
members. Of the
sorry, it's on. It is on. And the city commission, since I have been watching them, has not denied an upzone request. The zoning requests, even with protest of the adjoining neighbors, have always been approved. So I can see why the public would be concerned about having that large eightplex in an RA.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's just the comment.
Yeah, there were a broad range of comments on RA, without question. And there were a very large number that said we would be comfortable with something more, but feels too far. Okay, very legitimate comment. That's part of what we do this process for, is to get the feedback.
If I could just follow up question, just make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So it seems like there's a lot of constraints built in to, because of setbacks and things like that, that there's really, you'd have to have a considerable lot size in order to realize things. And so I'm wondering if the concern is about purchasing, properties that are adjacent to each other. We have seen where, basically an entire block gets purchased and redeveloped as one thing. What is the process? I mean, is there like lot line adjustments, or whereby somebody would merge parcels? Is that a public hearing process?
Nope. So those are called subdivision exemptions. They're explicitly a process set out in state law, and there is no public notice. There's no review by the planning board. It's just, I'm the landowner, it's my parcels, I'm reconfiguring them. You cannot use that to create more parcels, but you can consolidate or reconfigure the shape of those. You have to show that you're conforming with the zoning, but as long as you're doing that, then there's generally not any kind of formal process. Well, let me back that up. There is a formal process. It's a very carefully monitored public process, but it's a staff level process. And we probably get anywhere between 6 to 10 of those per year. Sometimes it's just, hey, it turns out that 100 years ago, somebody built the house in the wrong spot and somebody's cleaning up a property boundary, or, I want to do something and my neighbor and I are willing to move the boundary along to make both of us happy. So it can have a lot of different reasons for it.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add on to that? So,
Sure.
At what point then is the public informed of those upzone questions or changes?
If it's a zone map amendment, that's a very specific process that's laid out in statute. Application comes in. First thing it does is it hits the community development viewer before there's any notice or anything else prepared. As soon as we've verified that it's actually a complete application, then it goes up. And eventually it goes through the staff review. A formal public notice is distributed, the variety of different ways that happens. And then zoning commission has to hold a public hearing, city commission has to hold a public hearing, and then an implementing ordinance has to be adopted twice. Each of those times that has to show up on the commission agenda. So there's several steps in that
So
process.
those examples of the 9 that you showed earlier in the presentation, if they do come back and make those requests, those would go through
Those
this
would go through
process
that
you're
kind of a
talking about.
process, yep. And so that's where you publish something in the newspaper, you get the big yellow signs stuck on the property that says, something's happening, and you get to come look at the description.
Is that still true under the new law?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so there will be posted signs?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, actually the draft expands the notice area for zone map amendments. With the statute, it puts more emphasis at the policy making phase. And so to respect that, cities had a 200-foot mailed notice requirement for zone map amendments for very long time. And we're proposing to expand that to 300 feet. So there's a broader group of people who will specifically get that information. Everybody in the public is welcome to comment on it. That's why we publish them in the paper and put them up on the website and things like that. So not everybody gets any one media. And so we try to hit that from a variety of sources.
I just wanted to comment that the city commission does deny zone map amendments sometimes because we, the Northeast Neighborhood
that's
opposed
right.
one.
Yeah, you're right.
They wanted to change, the Outlaw Partners wanted to change that Bronkins property from any HMU, historic mixed use, Northeast historic mixed use, to B2M. And we opposed it, and they voted against it, and then they brought it up again, and we opposed it again. And actually, the second time, there's also a process, FYI, that the neighbors, if you get 25% of the neighbors within 150 feet, owners, property owners within 150 feet of the proposed zone change, then just to oppose that zone change, then it sets a higher standard that the zone change can't happen except with a supermajority of the commission, which is not huge, it's one person in this instance, but that's just another layer for you to be aware of.
Yeah. There was another one that was over on, anyway, right near Outlaw Brewing, where they ended up approving a portion of it and denying a portion of it. So honestly, the majority do get approved. And part of that goes to the growth policy. So that's our fundamental document adopted through a very public process and engagement that says this is how we, the city, think about these processes and we think about these criteria that are in the statute. And that section is Chapter 5, says very explicitly, if somebody can show that they meet the criteria, we're going to say yes. So it's this balance, right? So I have property rights and I have property responsibilities. I'm an adjacent owner, I have property rights, I have property responsibilities. We're the city, we collectively have all of these intermeshed responsibilities and rights. So the commission has adopted the policy that says we have our zoning in place, we've adopted all kinds of requirements to mitigate and offset impacts, making sure, you know, there's enough sewer flow and all the other pieces and parts. So if somebody can come in and demonstrate, and the burden's on them to show that they can do it, then the commission's kind of made the call that says, then on what public purpose do we deny that? They're conforming with the growth policy, they're conforming with the criteria. You know, it's like any other right. I don't want my neighbor telling me what I can say or who I can vote for. On the other hand, there's defamation and slander, so there's these checks and balances that are out there. So that's an important piece of the existing fabric of decision-making as it relates to any kind of a zone map amendment.
So I feel like this is working okay. Does this feel okay to folks if we like sort of pose one question that was submitted ahead of time, but allow people to ask for clarification or elaborate? I just want to make sure that we're moving through our list and we can get to as much as possible with a little bit of flexibility for people to ask clarification.
Danny, how many questions are there, just so that, to keep in mind how long the discussion should go on any one
I think
question?
we have about 10 on this list that was submitted that Chris had a chance to look over, and then there's your email that I haven't looked at yet.
Could we alternate? We started
Sure,
this one,
like you
mine
want to go to Brad
go
and then
to Amy.
Amy? Sure, yeah, okay, that sounds good. Okay, so a question from Brad. He says the city should notify all residents of zone changes being proposed that go beyond state mandates. Isn't this a legal requirement of the city?
Short answer is notice is required that we're changing the rules, and we need to give people enough information so that they have an understanding of what is being proposed. That's the baseline. There is nothing that says a different standard applies if it's a state mandated change or a locally created change. The process is the process. Now, the city regularly and consistently exceeds the state minimums. The state minimum for a text amendment is you have 2 published notices in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle. That's it. That's the state law. We certainly do that, but then we also have the Community Development Viewer, Engage Bozeman, lots and lots of other mechanisms that we use to push that information out for conversations. So conversations like we're having right now, and other kinds of things. So I don't know how much of a nuance you want to dive into on that, but there is requirement for notice. There's not a split requirement for locally created versus state directed changes.
Okay. Any clarification on that? Okay. So Amy posed this question, is there still an opportunity for our requested changes to the UDC code to be considered? Is there still time for those changes or suggested revisions to be considered? And she references specifically the NEMU revisions letter that was sent in as public comment, that was sent out, I think, to staff on October 5th.
October 3rd.
Okay, it was sent by you on October 3rd, and
But it wasn't posted until October 5th, so I'm concerned that you never saw it in advance of this presentation that you gave the Community Development Board, so it never got, maybe you would have included our points in your presentation.
I had not seen it. We checked with the clerk. Normally what happens when somebody sends in an attachment and you click on the link, it's like, here's my transmittal, and then you see the actual document. For some reason, it hadn't carried down. So the link was still there. You could click on it and activate it, but it hadn't displayed, so that's been corrected. So that is still in consideration. The public comment period is still open. Board has not closed the public comment period. Even after they do, then the City Commission will do their own public comment period, and people can continue to bring forward ideas all the way up until the Commission closes their public hearing process. So there's still plenty of time left to bring ideas in.
okay, back to you, Linda. Scrolling to the top of my list here. Okay, so zone edge transitions is sort of the subject of this next couple questions. The city made the decision to consider a street an appropriate enough separation to not trigger the zone edge transition standards. So why does the city insist that a street is an appropriate zone edge boundary? The Code Studio group told me that this concept is somewhat unique to Bozeman. Other cities use different architectural design standards to markate those zone edge boundaries. Can you provide some context there?
Yeah, fundamentally, we use the street as a separator for 2 reasons. One, it's very, very visible, and it's legally existing. Only the city controls the street, so we can't take it, somebody can't take it away. And the street generally is 60 feet wide. So when you start drawing and sketching things out, a 60-foot setback from whoever's next to you is about as good as you're going to get out of any kind of configuration of any kind of transition. And so we always are balancing. We could create something that's far more complicated in order to reach, a certain outcome. The question is always, is that additional amount of work, drafting the code, applying the code, working with the neighborhood to understand the code, going to give you a materially different and better outcome? And in 2018, when the city first adopted the transitions standard, they looked at it and said, we have these public streets, we try to put our zoning boundaries on streets in the first place, and so we feel that that is enough of a transition by itself. And then the places where you don't have that physical separation is something where there's a zoning district that goes right through the middle of a block. We try and avoid those, but there are still some out there. So it becomes both a practicality matter, and then we think we're largely getting the outcome that people are trying to get by using the streets.
What do you do when there's a large B3 budding with a street between an
Mhm.
R2, and all there is that street and a 7-story building and a 1-story home? That doesn't appear to be a transition. That appears to be overtaking that property. Other cities, and there was a large group of people that studied this, other cities
Mhm.
use architectural elements so that if a home is across R2, R3 is
Mhm.
across from a B3, there are architectural design elements that are considered, not just the street.
Mhm.
And it seems to work for cities all over, and it surely does create a situation where there is no balance between B3 and R2. So I absolutely don't see any point having a street as a transition. And I don't understand, the whole section on transitions is based around the idea that this will only occur in the middle of a block or if there's an alley. And the city has very actively tried to get rid of those situations.
Mhm.
So that whole area of code is only going to be used minimally and probably in the older areas downtown.
Most likely in the older areas, yeah.
Yeah.
Most folks are designing their subdivisions to put the boundaries on the streets for the new stuff.
So what's going to happen in the downtown when those situations occur?
There will be a similar situation on either side of the street. That's fundamentally the policy call that the city commission made in 18. They considered it again in February. Code Studio did get a chance to visit with the folks that did that research and took that into account. Commission said, we want to do it this way.
Awesome. Okay, so is there any hope of getting that section changed?
You can
Is there
persuade your
any-
elected officials to do it a different way.
Because we have a situation in our neighborhood where that's exactly what it is.
Mhm. It becomes an interesting exercise at some point when you're trying to balance interests, and this actually came up a lot where laws were passed and then later overturned because they were considered to be excessive, where people said, oh, we want to protect farmers, we have a right to farm law, and they put burdens on the adjacent non-ag properties. And the non-ag properties said, wait a minute, I'm getting nothing out of this. This is an unbalanced situation. There's no exchange of benefit here. They won. So we do have to be careful about saying we're putting all the responsibility on only one part of this interaction. So that plays out in a huge degree of nuance on a site-by-site basis. But as a design principle for writing code, it's an important thing for us to consider.
So who would be shouldering the responsibility in that case?
Well, if you said, all right, the people in B3 normally get to have XYZ feet, but because they're across the street from somebody else, they can only use half of the allowed height, just making up numbers. The B3 property is taking all of the hit, and the other people are getting all of the benefit. That's an unbalanced relationship. There's no obligations of mutual benefit. So that becomes a situation where the person is saying, well, wait a minute, I'm losing on this for no fault of my own. It's not because I did something that the city can make me upgrade a sewer line or fix a park or something as a result of my action. I'm being penalized to benefit the other person. That's where you get that unbalanced situation and becomes difficult to make work.
I want to add a couple pieces in here too. I think one thing, if you haven't looked at the transition section of the proposed code, I think it does a really good job in characterizing the different types of transition. So it's explained in horizontal transition, like setbacks or the distance a certain building is across the street from an adjacent differing zone. And then it talks about like vertical transitions, and that would be like a step back if a building were to sort of like be terraced in height to its maximum. It also introduces this other kind of transition, which I think was based on the input from the Vision Northeast group about adding vegetation into those horizontal transitions, and City Commission liked that idea. So if you haven't looked at that section of the draft code, I highly encourage you to do it. It's really approachable, and there's like all sorts of good drawings that talk about those different kind of transitions and where they apply.
But that only applies if there's an alley or abutting properties in the same block. It doesn't
That's
apply
correct.
to buildings across the street.
That's
Correct.
correct. And that's where City Commission made this determination that in balancing the impacts to adjacent neighborhoods and prioritizing this directive from the community plan to add more residential units into existing developed areas, they said, we understand that this might block afternoon sun to the house across the street. We understand that this might take away some Bridger views. And we're okay with that because we understand that we want to prioritize increase in residential development in the core area of town. And that's just the decision that they went with. So again, familiarize yourself with that section of the code. Linda, I know that you've been in there plenty, but that's the trade-off that City Commission is trying to balance here.
And does that also include solar? So if somebody has solar on the other side, that's not a responsibility at all?
You can negotiate a solar easement with adjacent property, like between two parties. Did look into that, but it would be between the two owners. You can actually negotiate a solar easement from your neighbor.
Yeah, and there's specific state law that authorizes those kinds of solar easements. There's nothing that I'm aware of anywhere in state law that says, I built a solar panel and so my neighbor can't take advantage of the development rights that they have. It goes back to that, wait a minute, I'm taking all the hit, they're getting all the benefits type situation. Now, it does play into the fact that we have setbacks and we have building heights maximums that prevent somebody from coming in and putting a 400-foot tall building in that casts a shadow that goes, eighth of a mile. But yeah, it's constantly juggling. If we do this, then who's the winner, who's the loser, how's the balance of fairness play out? We all inconvenience somebody somehow, and some of that's just inherent with living in an urban environment. But at the same time, we have to kind of be nice both directions.
Brad, I've got another question from you if there's no more clarification.
Well, I did want to, maybe this is the question you're getting to, but for those, this still has to deal with transition. For those properties that do share a long property line, am I hearing you correctly that the City Commission, the development, the codes, take a more conservative approach to restrict the zoning, and would not be as flexible?
And which
Or
can I summarize
Yeah,
what
please.
I think I heard? So you're asking if there's a property boundary and there's one zoning district on this side and a different zoning district on this side, those zone edge transitions are more strict. That is true.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just comment and then question about the transition. That came up here in discussion, and my wheelhouse is landscaping, and the issue with the vegetation, it is great in the rendering, but we have a finite palette of plant material to work with.
Yes, we do.
And so based on exposure and light exposure, it'd be really difficult on a north and east side to actually have vegetation. So I don't know what you do with that, but it's very difficult to translate that. You could install it,
Mm-hmm.
whether it would survive,
Yep.
so there's that. But then, just as an exercise in this thinking about benefit back and forth. So in an ideal scenario, in support of density, would it be fair to say it's like if that both, the person across the street and, the opposing facing each other, that they would have to develop at the same time? Is that, you know, like an ideal situation where it's like, well, I'm going up 4 stories, you're going up 2. And so there we have it. Because when, you know, a single-family home on a, you know, even if it's on an R3 can build up as well. So I don't know how we, you know, manage that. I don't know that, if we have a tool to manage, okay, we're both gonna jump at the same time. You know, you're gonna build and I'm gonna build and it's gonna happen at once. I don't know how you.
Yeah, from a zoning standpoint, we can't control to that degree. And you're spot on about the ability to develop. All of our zoning districts today will allow 3 stories, sometimes considerably more than that. Most folks don't choose to do that. Personally, I'm pretty tired of going up and down stairs sometimes. But if somebody wants to, if you drive around the older part of town, you'll see 3rd stories on South 8th, on Olive Street, Grand, a bunch of different places. There's some out in Baxter Meadows, and I believe there's some in Alder Creek and elsewhere. So they're not common, but there are people who have chosen to do that. Some of it well before there was any zoning, some of it after. So, you know, one of the things that the code tries to do is look more closely at context-sensitive design with the wall plate concept in the RA, where it's like, okay, yeah, you can go 3 stories, but you got to go up here, and then you got to start pulling in, rather than just a straight-up blank, not necessarily blank, maybe it has windows, but a direct, you know, harsh 3-story wall. So we're working on some of those things because we certainly recognize that if I'm accustomed to a 1-story house next to me and all of a sudden it's a 3-story house next to me, even if it's all R1 or R anything, it sure feels different. Even though the code may have been in place for decades that said they could do it, the fact is they hadn't yet. So it's not my expectation, it's not my experience.
Is there anything within, like, you know, whether it's the NCOD or, you know, some, like the Northeast, is there anything in the UDC that does address that, you know, what is in existence, you know, from a historic district standpoint, is there anything that does put limiters on based on what is already existing, not what it could be built to? Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
Other than historic district, like aesthetic design standards.
That will shape the building. It will not prevent somebody from building it to the maximum that's allowed.
Correct. So like the mass and scale of a building in a historic district is regulated by the base zoning code, but the aesthetic and the design characteristics of that structure have to conform to the historic district standards.
Yeah. And that's something that we often have conversations with folks and there's some confusion about. The nature of a historic district or historic recognition, it's an honorary mention. It has no protecting effect unless the city chooses to regulate one. From a federal level, I can have the most awesome historic district, ticks every possible single box, and it will not prevent somebody from walking in and scraping the whole place. Bozeman has put standards in that have been in place for a number of years that say, look, if you're going to propose demolition, we're going to look at all of these different kinds of things. You know, is it reasonable to be able to renovate your home? Is this just, I want something different? Or is it honestly, you know, the only thing holding it up is the termites hugging each other? So there's a whole series of evaluations that have to happen. And the city can invoke up to a 2-year stay that says, we know you want to tear it down. Yes, what you're proposing to do is allowed, but we're still going to make you wait. But on day 1, after that 2 years, they go to go get their building permit. And that 2-year period is as far as we could find any justification for anywhere in the nation. When we put that code together 5 or 6 years ago, we worked with the city attorney, with our historic preservation officer, with the state historic preservation office, to really explore what are the limits on our ability to regulate this stuff. So I think folks sometimes over-expect what historic designation can do. It's important, it's an essential part of our community character. We value it, we put protections in place to the degree that we can. But there's some hard lines on what the city can do about telling somebody, yeah, it's your property, but you can't tinker with it.
Okay, y'all, I'm gonna move on to Brad's question. So this is a question that was posed at the virtual open house in August, and it's something that we've heard a couple times
Mhm.
about. So what is the relationship between HOA bylaws and covenants and the city zoning code, whether that's R1 or RA?
That is a fascinating and difficult to answer question. They are two fundamentally different pieces of state law. The things that authorize zoning and the things that authorize covenants. Zoning is Title 76, covenants are Title 70. And so Title 70 is all about private contracts and who has an easement and who can do this and who can do that. Title 76 is, we are the government and we are telling you X, whatever that might be. To the best of my knowledge, nobody has really explored how those integrate. So it may very well depend on the wording. Is the issue of conflict something where the city is allowing something and they're trying to prohibit it from a private side? Or is it the city mandating something and the private side maybe wants to take it further? So the city has a standard that says your front yard fence can't be more than 4 feet tall. Had that standard for years and years. The covenants might say, and it must be pink. City's gonna say, we don't care if it's pink, we care if it's 4 feet tall and you can not run over somebody on the sidewalk when you pull out of your driveway. No conflict at all. But if the neighbors say, or the HOA says, you must have an 8-foot fence in your front yard, and the city says, no, you can only have a 4-foot fence, that becomes an interesting point of discussion. Well, that's about as detailed of an answer as I can provide. I am not an attorney, I do not play one on television.
Yeah, this is such a tricky one. I mean, like, I think Chris did a good job of explaining the nuance, but like, essentially, like, we don't know until a lawsuit happens, right?
Yeah.
Like, Marwin Lindley is a really good example of this. I wish Lori was here, but they have these covenants that are like ancient, they've never been touched, nobody knows how to change them. They prohibit fences, ADUs, and building second stories on any home within the Marwin Lindley neighborhood. And if you go walk around there, there's ADUs, there's fences, there's 2-story houses, like people have renovated to put 2-story houses on there. So obviously their neighborhood is not very litigious. Otherwise, people would be getting sued for violating the covenants. But the city zoning, like, we don't care what happens in that neighborhood as long as it follows the city zoning code and regulations. So that's sort of an example that is more relevant to this conversation of, well, the city is already permissive of all of those things. It's up to the residents within that HOA to sue each other if they don't like what's happening.
Right, the city is not going to enforce covenants. It's between the individuals. I would think that when a city rule conflicts with a covenant, the covenant's a private relationship, so I think the city rule would trump normally. You have to you can't have an 8-foot fence, even though your covenant says you can have an 8-foot fence.
And it, you know, this stuff rapidly devolves into the specifics of how did somebody write something? Is it permissive? Is it restrictive? Did they word it artfully? Is it a jumbled mess that nobody can understand what it means? If you've spent much time looking at covenants, some people do a very nice job, and some people you wonder where they got it from. I was working on one project in town where the private covenants that were brought forward from a out-of-state attorney said we could not build a landfill, we could not build a man camp, and all these other kinds of things that absolutely would have violated every standard in the city of Bozeman regulations. But those are their standard corporate covenants that they used because they built in a lot of unincorporated areas. It's like, okay, have a nice time. When it became time for them to modify those covenants, it took over a year to get 5 different entities to agree to make a change. So some of these covenants are managed well, some of them are not managed at all. To Danny's point, somebody wrote it years ago and all the things have been lost. So it's very, very specific.
hope that clarified things for you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so another city commission priority from the last sort of 2-year cycle is providing some model language that HOAs could take and insert into their covenants to better align covenants with city code. So it's not, again, we don't have any influence over covenants, but we can say, hey, we suggest, if you're a part of an HOA, that you take this draft code language and insert it into your covenants so that people can have drought-tolerant landscaping where maybe it's not allowed now, or where people can have in-home childcare businesses where maybe covenants prevent that now. Things that sort of align with our city priorities. We want to make it easy for HOAs to adapt their covenants to align with those priorities. So that's that project that's on the horizon for next month.
Kind of answers the, but how do I do that question? There's a lot of things you can say, wouldn't you like to? And they say, well, yeah, but I don't know how. And so this is providing some guidance for that. They choose to decide whether or not to do it.
Okay. So Amy's second question here is around the NEMU regulations.
Actually, maybe I could phrase
Yeah,
it,
go
because I
for it,
didn't really
yeah.
write it as a question so much. So, I guess my question to you is whether, my understanding is that the regulations pertaining to the NEHMU did not get changed in this draft.
They were touched very lightly at direction of the commission. The commission wanted to have a more intensive discussion around that area. So they said, yes, we want it to fit into the same look and feel and flow of the
Sure.
rest of the document, but largely keep it as is.
Okay, so there's two things, and one, I guess we could talk about this. We proposed a bunch of changes, not a bunch, actually just a very small amount of changes specifically to the NEHMU, that a small group of active NENA members have been meeting. We met with developers and with Marty Madsen and other people to try to have some consensus around some changes that we think, because we're frankly really tired of this, it's a unique zone in Bozeman, and it keeps getting eaten away at the edges by people proposing to change it to B2M, because the regulations in NEMU are such that, you know, if you wanted to do something residential, you can't do it. If you wanted to have, you know, there's all these, so we made some specific changes that I hope get considered, and it was actually at the urging of Mayor Anderson and Commissioner Magic for us to do that. So you have those, the big one being the current regulation that that a mixed-use building has to be 50% commercial. And we want the area to remain mixed use to a certain extent, while recognizing that the city needs more housing. And so we proposed making that 20% commercial, or non-residential, 80% residential. You can have, that can be the dynamic. But there was, in the draft, I did notice that the format, the look of it has changed, but you have changed the maximum height from a foot measurement to a number of stories. And the current code, the maximum building height in the NEHMU is 50 feet. And it's been changed now to 5 stories. And I would suggest that 5 stories will 9 times out of 10 exceed 50 feet, and perhaps by a significant amount. And so I wonder if that was an intentional change, like if someone had considered the math on that, because, you know, buildings now, a lot of times the first floor is 5 foot off the ground to start with. And then the first floor is generally 15 feet. I don't know the terminology of the space between floors, you know, the ceiling, and what's that called?
Depends on who you ask. I refer to it as the floor package.
The floor package, okay. So if you have, and then if you have 10-foot stories above it with the with 2 feet of the floor package, that's gonna turn into 68 feet, which is a lot higher than 50 feet. So we were, I don't know if someone just put 5 stories in there or thought about it, didn't think about it. It seems to me that 4 stories, if you're gonna put it in terms of 4 stories, a max of 4 stories would fit that 50 feet, and a max of 5 stories will likely really exceed that.
Okay. Thanks. We'll take that into consideration.
Thanks.
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left, and a handful more questions. I'm wondering how much time we want to save for neighborhood updates and, city liaison updates, or if we want to just take like three more questions. Stick with this agenda item? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Maybe,
will be there next time.
yeah. Maybe we should each start prioritizing.
Sure, yeah, if there's a question that you feel is especially important to go next.
It was not emailed, well, it was, but very late.
Okay.
But the zone map amendment, so it sounds like after Community Development Board met, you know, changes to the map are on hold until the text is done. I'm asking in regard to the North 7th NCOD, changes that are happening there.
No. They specifically were addressing comments that had asked for individual edits, not the map as a whole as presented, which includes that adjustment to the NCOD boundary. So they did not discuss that. Whether they will want to make the change or not, that's another question, but they did not reach that in their conversation.
So can you speak to why they want to take some of the properties out of the NCOD along 7th?
Yeah, Commission said so.
Okay.
Back in about 2019, there was a report called the Bennett Adams Report that came in and looked at, discussed our historic preservation program, made some recommendations for changes. One of the things they identified was we had competing documents where the NCOD is overlapping the east side. We have an urban renewal plan and a zoning district, and a lot of other things are saying you should actually be significantly redeveloping that area, and you have these things in tension. And so one of the recommendations from the plan, the Bennett Adams plan, was you should resolve this conflict, and we think the best way to do that is to move the boundary. And so the city did some research on, re-inventoried that area up there to look at it, and that actually was going to be an independent zone map amendment several years ago. COVID ran over the top of it and reprioritized a whole lot of things. And so it was brought forward for discussion with this one.
So given the looseness of, you know, the enforcement side, or the, you know, the dull piece of, you know, the NCOD, that vertex historic stuff, if I'm, you know, looking for an answer, well, what does that change? Like, how does that change what's allowed and what's not? You know, what potential does it change?
It does not change the allowed uses in any way, shape, or form. The uses are set by the underlying zoning, so if it's B2M, then you can do B2M things. If it's R5, then you do R5 things. What the NCOD does is add in those design elements. So it might affect, you know, the street-facing facades or something like that, because we have some commercial standards that talk about how those fit. Interestingly enough, a lot of the stuff that are included in those are also now part of the base code everywhere. For commercial uses, you will have an entry, you will have transparent windows along the street, you will have a big long list of things. So the degree of difference between them is considerably lessened than it would have been, say, 10 years ago.
Thank you.
I just had a general question. When the public comment and the study groups and the different code meetings were held, they were divided up into groups like general public, developers, and they were all kept separate, and there was no time for people to talk together. Why, do you know why that was done?
Kind of for the same reason we're here talking to you. If this is a group that has a certain set of common issues as neighborhoods, and so we can have a more focused conversation, rather than just shotgunning to every possible combination of potential discussions. So if you're having, if you're wanting to inquire about a specific topic, how's the NCOD working out, then it's a great thing to talk to the Historic Preservation Board. It's good to talk to this group. And it may be appropriate to talk to the developers as well, because that's 3 different viewpoints of it. So part of it becomes efficiency, part of it just becomes the ability to manage the population. There's only so big of a room that you can get and have an effective conversation with. So at some point you have to decide how you're going to reach out to all of the different groups, and then we have other, workshops and code connects and other kinds of things that are open call to anybody and everybody to weigh in on and share those thoughts back and forth.
Yeah, I'll chime in there as the engagement person on this project. Like, Chris covered a lot of it, but every community meeting that we had was open to everyone, right? The content that we delivered to meetings with the design professionals community, the InterNeighborhood Council, different neighborhood association meetings, the code connects, the content that we presented in all of those meetings was the same. But the input that we get from those different constituent groups is different. And so when you have a more tailored group, you're able to have, a more focused conversation and back and forth. So we did 3 things. We held and hosted our own meetings at different times and places, right? The intercept activities we did at farmers markets, the Bozeman Maid Fair, college classrooms, high school classrooms. Those were times when we were going out to the community and hosting our own events and inviting whoever to come. The other avenue, or the other type of engagement, is going to standing meetings. So neighborhood association meetings, Gallatin Association of Realtor invited us to a meeting. So those invites that we go to, or we accept from different community groups who want to hear about this project. And then, those are the 2 types. So again, it's finding that balance to have productive conversations with different groups who use this code or interact with the outcomes of it in a different way.
Brad.
Thanks. I'll ask a question about timing, and this maybe go beyond your scope, but Danny, you can also comment on it. I mean, we heard at the Community Development Board meeting quite a bit on Monday night or Tuesday night, whenever that was, that the public community did not, while all that effort was put in, did not feel, it was difficult to reach the public community, right? And now we have critical mass, public's engaged. You have a city commissioner who unfortunately is not engaged for all the right reasons. And, there's a desire from the public, a very loud ask, can we slow this process down? It's feeling forced. It's feeling like there's a deadline and we have to stick to a deadline when there are so many vital comments that are so applicable to Bozeman making the right decisions going forward. And we're forcing something that could be really wrong for this community. Can we not wait for the city commission to be fully seated? And just think about this and slow this down. So is there any thought or possibility of that?
2 parts. One is the staff works at the direction of the city manager, who works at the direction of the city commission, and the city commission adopted a specific set of to-dos for this biennium. So we've been working on that. That schedule, if the commission says slow down, then we absolutely can. But it's not the staff's decision to make. So as part of this process, as all of them, is getting a content that you can put out to the public for the public to see. if you had sat in some of the same meetings I sat in, you would probably be so bored stiff, you'd be having to wake up halfway through the meeting and remind yourself why you were there. It gets really monotonous and boring sometimes, just banging through the minutia. But when there's real substance, and it's not just, well, kind of, sort of, maybe, perhaps, there's really something in front of you to look at, then we find that the public is much more able to have a conversation among themselves and with the appointed people. And so, you know, we've done our part from the staff side of getting that out to the public for consideration. The public's now weighing in on their part of it, and then Community Development Board is charged with considering that public comment, considering the draft, making a recommendation. You know, they've been listening very hard for the last 2 meetings. The next meeting is scheduled for the 16th. They haven't even started, you know, talking about this is what we've heard yet, because they've still been in active listening mode. So the commission will have to go through that same process as well, of taking into account all the suggestions and ideas and concerns. So they absolutely could say, we're totally prepared to take some more time. That's fully within their control. Okay, thanks.
All right, you guys, so with a few minutes left, I'll just do what I always do, which is remind us of sort of the next steps of this process. Again, like Chris mentioned, the Community Development Board will have their public hearing round 2 on Monday night, and then this goes before City Commission, let's see, for an introduction on the
24th is the schedule, and basically that meeting is not a decision meeting of any sort. It's to say, here's what's happened so far, here's what a schedule looks like going forward. So folks can say, all right, now that we have set meeting times or whatever, they can be aware of it. To date, we haven't advertised the City Commission meeting, so we're still working this process through with the Community Development Board, and so we deliberately held that action to advertise the commission meetings. So we're gonna, that's a very deliberative kind of process, so.
And all of these dates are on the Engage Bozeman page. So there's the upcoming meeting with Community Development Board on the 16th, and then that City Commission meeting, sort of intro and overview, on the 24th. And that is the first of 5 meetings with the City Commission in which public comment will be seen, considered throughout the formal adoption process.
Yeah. If you listened in on the September 11th meeting with the Community Development Board, that's very similar to what we're talking about for the 24th, where it was, here's the project, here's how the schedule is to proceed, this is how people can get information, this is how people can comment, just to kind of lay out the ground rules, make sure everybody knows what's going to happen next. That's always a concern, that folks know how to engage. So we built a deliberate step in there to share that information.
All right.
We've got 5 minutes left, which usually doesn't require public comment, but since we have people here, could we do that?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Is there any public comment?
Thanks for giving us another opportunity. My name is Angie Gachowick, 620 North Tracy Avenue. I am in communication with Danny on this topic, but I thought, since I'm here in the room with fellow neighbors and the Neighborhood Council, I wanted to bring up a concern that I had, and a respectful request for the Community Development UDC team to consider tacking on to something that Brad brought to light, which is the overwhelming number of comments that the UDC project and the Community Development Board has received, is this general sentiment of please slow down, wrap the proposal, start over. I mean, they're all kind of a different variation of the same theme. My concern is, when I looked at the chart that the team is using to show what the different comments are talking about, I didn't see, and maybe I'm wrong, but I didn't see a column that captured those comments. The slow down, the start over, the scrap the proposal. There were specific things within it, like if somebody was willing to sort of play the game of like, okay, here's a change I'd like to see in the proposal, that's captured. But the comments that say, hey, wait a minute, this whole thing is just not jiving with me. So my request is that all of the comments received, whatever 300 I think I heard, those are re-looked at, and if the general sentiment is slow down, scrap it, or start over, that deserves to be counted, literally counted. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
My name's Allison Sweeney. I live at 503 South 14th Avenue. I thought this meeting started at 6. So once again, me and my people are left out. I came to you in April of last year saying that I wanted to start a neighborhood association to protect my neighborhood from the huge wealthy development that has been taking over Bozeman. Never once did you mention to me that Bozeman was rewriting the zoning. I feel like you must have known. So I feel like I didn't pursue something that I should have because I travel for work and I couldn't commit to the meeting every single month. I let my people down because I didn't pursue that because I didn't have the full picture. Now I'm here and I'm pursuing it and I want to start a neighborhood association and I filled out the forms. I brought the forms that I filled out last year, but I can regather all those signatures if you want. But I'm just here because me and my people want to be included. I heard about the UDC on September 17th, and that day will live like 9/11 in my brain because it is an attack on our neighborhood. We are one-story homes. It just feels we were never included. Nobody that I know knew this was happening. So slow down, scrap the plan. At least have a town hall, something to make us feel like we have a say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything else, Danny?
Nope, I had the letter for neighborhood association use of city facilities on the agenda, but I think that was Suzanne's effort, and I think she'll be back for the November meeting, and we just need signatures on that, and then we can move that through the process and proposal to city commission. So, yeah, I am comfortable moving that to the next meeting unless you all want to. Okay. Yeah, Amy?
I just wanted to share something. I wonder if you could pull up, can you do a website on your screen?
Yeah, I could share here, yeah.
The Northeast Neighborhood is holding its signature event on Sunday, the Parade of Sheds. And if you could pull up the website, we have a flyer on there that has a list of the tour stops, and it also has a QR code. That's why I wanted to pull it up. So if you're interested, you can, oh, that's 2021. What? Look under upcoming events or news. Yeah. So if you click on that, just the PDF, the link for, yeah. So scroll down to, this is a description of the stops, but there's a QR code on there. And so if people want to scan that with their phone, you can have the map on your phone, and you could, you know, feel free to share this. So we have a dozen stops. It should be really fun. We have a parade at 1:30, and we encourage people to come and wear costumes and have your pets or whatever you want to do, feel free to do it. And the tour is from 2 to 4, just open house at your own, you know, visit one, visit all. And then we're having a neighborhood potluck, which can be, everyone's welcome. So, and that's at 4, either at the Climbing Rock or at Tin Works in inclement weather, so should be a blast.
Okay, it's 6:03, so I call this meeting to an end and adjourn.
Thanks, everybody.